Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
All right, let's talk about one of the biggest mysteries in the history of technology. We're going to trace the very first moves of Satoshi Nakamoto, the ghost who created Bitcoin, and figure out how they managed to launch a global revolution without anyone ever knowing who they were. Let's dive in.
I mean, that's really the core question here, isn't it? Bitcoin didn't launch with some big press conference or a celebrity CEO. Nope, it was started by a shadow, an anonymous figure who built this world-changing tech, and then, well, they just vanished.
And think about this. For 2 whole years, Satoshi was an active presence online. They were developing the code, talking to people on forums, but only ever as a digital entity, just a name on a screen. There was no person to see, no voice to hear.
So how do you even begin to understand someone who's basically a ghost? Well, you start by looking at the very strict rules they set for themselves, the rules of their own anonymity.
And this is what's so wild, how absolute these rules were. No one, and I mean no one, has ever credibly claimed to have met Satoshi in person. No one ever talked to them on the phone. The entire foundation of Bitcoin was built on text, just emails and forum posts. This was more than just privacy. It was a total erasure of a real-world identity. And that was smart, because it forced Bitcoin to stand on its own 2 feet, with no leader and no single point of failure.
Okay, so if we're dealing with a ghost, all we have are their digital footprints. So let's go back to the very first breadcrumbs Satoshi left for the world to find. And here it is. Before any code, before any white paper, there was a website domain, bitcoin.org. This was the first public sign that someone, somewhere, was working on something called Bitcoin. You could almost call it the digital groundbreaking ceremony.
Then, just a couple of months later, the blueprint itself dropped. Satoshi published this 9-page document, the now legendary Bitcoin white paper. It laid out the whole idea, from start to finish, and it wasn't sent to just anyone. It was posted on a cryptography mailing list to a group of experts who would actually get what a huge deal this was.
And right away, you can see these little puzzles being laid out. The name, Satoshi Nakamoto, sounds Japanese, but the email address used a German domain. So, is he Japanese? German? Neither? The mystery was literally baked into the project from day one.
So, you've got the plan, right? But a plan is just an idea. The next part is where the magic happens, where this idea goes from a document to a living, breathing network.
And boy, did it happen fast. On January 3rd, 2009, Satoshi mined what we now call the Genesis block. This was basically the big bang of the Bitcoin universe, the moment the first block of transactions was created. Just 6 days after that, the software was released to the public so anyone could download it and join in.
So what was the point of mining that first block? Well, it came with a prize, a reward of 50 Bitcoins. These were the very first coins to ever exist, conjured out of thin air by the code Satoshi wrote.
But look, creating coins is one thing. They're kind of useless if they just sit there. The next, and maybe most important step, was to prove that the network could actually move those coins between 2 different people.
And it only took 3 days. Just 3 days after the software went public, the first peer-to-peer Bitcoin transaction ever happened. This was the moment the theoretical idea of digital cash became a real thing you could actually use.
The transaction itself was so simple, it was beautiful. Satoshi Nakamoto sent 50 Bitcoins to a cryptographer named Hal Finney. It was the first digital handshake on the network, a perfect echo of that first 50-coin block reward.
And that quote from Hal Finney himself really says it all. You can just feel the weight of that moment. He knew he was part of something new, and it turns out he was the perfect person to be on the receiving end. You have to understand, Hal Finney wasn't just some random guy. He was a legend in the cryptography world. By sending the first transaction to a respected peer like him, Satoshi was doing more than just testing the network. He was basically submitting his project for review. It was a signal to the whole community that this was serious business.
So when you step back and you put all these pieces together, these are the foundational bricks of an entirely new financial system, and every single one of them was laid by a ghost.
So let's just run through that trail one more time. First, the clue with the domain name. Then, the blueprint with the white paper, the creation of the first block, the release of the first tool for everyone to use, and finally, the first human connection on the network. A perfectly methodical and totally anonymous launch. And that brings us to the most fascinating question of all. Satoshi built the foundation, turned on the lights, tested the plumbing, and then just walked away. They left this incredible creation to grow on its own. It's a legacy that's defined not just by what was built, but by the deep, enduring mystery of the creator who was never there.
You know, when it comes to the great mysteries of technology, there's really nothing bigger than the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto, right? The creator of Bitcoin. For years, everyone's been trying to unmask this ghost in the machine. But what if the biggest clues were hiding in plain sight the whole time? Let's dive into the evidence and see what we can find.
So we're going to treat this like a real detective case. Our suspect is, well, a complete ghost. But they left a trail, not of fingerprints, but of words. And if we analyze those words carefully, we can start to build a pretty clear profile of the person behind the legend.
And what a trail it is. We're talking about nearly 100,000 words left behind in public forums and emails. I mean, that's practically a novel. That is our crime scene. And it's a huge body of evidence, just packed with patterns and habits that can tell us a lot about the author if we just know where to look.
All right, so our investigation begins now. We're going to dissect Satoshi's writing style, looking for all those tiny little linguistic tells that can help us piece together this massive puzzle of their identity.
Okay, so our first clue is a real head-scratcher. Satoshi's writing, it has a kind of accent, linguistically speaking, but it's an accent that seems to jump back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean. It's weird. So let's start with word choice. Think of it like a dialect, you know? The specific words and phrases you use can often point to where you're from, or at least where you've spent a good chunk of time. For example, get this. Satoshi used expressions like bloody hard. Now, that is a huge red flag. It's a phrase you'd almost exclusively hear from someone with a British or maybe Australian background. It's a very specific linguistic fingerprint. But here's the twist. While the phrases were often very British, the spelling wasn't. Satoshi frequently used American spelling conventions. So this creates a real puzzle. Was this person just well-traveled? Or maybe it was a team of people? Or, and this is the interesting part, was it a deliberate choice to throw us all off the scent? All right, our next clue is fascinating because it's not about what Satoshi wrote, but how they typed it. It's like finding a fossil in the text, a habit from a totally different era of writing. Satoshi consistently used 2 spaces after a period. Now, for anyone who learned to type on a computer, this sounds bizarre. It's just not something we do. But for anyone who learned on an old-school physical typewriter, it was the golden rule. It was drilled into them for decades. Just take a look at this example from Satoshi's writing. See that little extra gap after the first sentence? That's not a mistake. That's the habit in action. It's a very specific and very telling little quirk that pops up again and again throughout all those thousands of words. So what does this actually tell us? Well, this little typographic fossil points to someone who almost certainly learned to type before the mid-1990s, which is when single spacing became the standard for computers. We're looking at a ghost from the typewriter age.
You know, in any good investigation, sometimes the most important clue is what's missing. Our third piece of evidence isn't something Satoshi wrote, but everything they didn't write. I mean, when you read Satoshi's work, it feels like you're reading a technical manual. It is so intensely focused. The topics are always, and I mean always, about Bitcoin, its design, its potential, its problems. The style is scientific, it's precise, and it's completely professional. And here's this stark contrast. There is a complete, total, absolute absence of anything personal. No mention of family, friends, hobbies, what they had for breakfast, nothing. When people tried to ask personal questions, Satoshi just ignored them. There was no time for small talk. There was only the mission. The level of focus here is just astounding. The writing is incredibly clean and well-structured, with almost 0 errors. This wasn't just some casual forum posting. This was the work of a highly disciplined, incredibly careful author who was deliberately building a purely professional, almost robotic persona. Okay, so we've gathered our clues. The weird linguistic mix, the old-fashioned typing habit, and that intensely impersonal tone. Now it's time to put it all together. Let's build our final profile of the suspect. So after digging through all the evidence, what kind of person are we looking for? What does the writing really tell us about the writer behind the keyboard? All right, let's lay out the case file. First up, that linguistic mix, the The British phrases with the American spelling tells us they were very familiar with British English. Next, the punctuation, those double spaces, that points to someone who learned to type back in the pre-digital era. Then there's the content and tone. With zero personal details, we see a highly disciplined scientific mind at work. And finally, the fact that everything was in English. It makes it really, really unlikely the author was actually Japanese. So our final profile looks something like this. We're looking for a highly educated, exceptionally disciplined writer, someone who's comfortable with British English, probably old enough to have learned on a typewriter, and almost certainly not a native of Japan. And yet, there's still this one nagging question, isn't there? We've built this whole profile based on tens of thousands of words. But did we actually find the real person? Or did we just perfectly describe the exact character they wanted us to see? Maybe the ultimate clue isn't a single word or a quirky habit, but the sheer perfection of the performance itself. Maybe this profile doesn't unmask a person at all. Maybe it reveals a master of disguise, someone who carefully crafted every single word, every space, and every silence to create the greatest mystery of the digital age. And that, maybe that, is the real genius of Satoshi Nakamoto. You've heard the name, right? Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin. The name alone sounds like a legend, more of a myth than an actual person. We picture this reclusive genius, a mind that comes along once in a generation, who just completely changes the world and then, poof, vanishes. But what if we could just strip away all that myth for a second? What are we actually left with? What skills did it really take to build Bitcoin? So, what are we really looking for here? Was Satoshi some kind of coding god who wrote this perfect, untouchable code from day one? Or maybe a brilliant crypto pioneer who just invented entirely new ways to keep things secret? Let's actually dig into the evidence and see what skills this person or group of people really had. The first thing you gotta understand is that creating Bitcoin wasn't just about one brilliant idea in one specific field. No way. It was this incredible combination of deep, deep expertise across a whole bunch of different disciplines. It's like you needed someone who could see the entire chessboard, not just how one piece moves. I mean, just look at this list. Think about the sheer range of knowledge here. You needed to understand economics and the history of money to even know why something like Bitcoin was necessary. Then you needed the technical chops, peer-to-peer computing, databases, C++ coding, to actually build the thing. And of course, you needed the cryptography to make it all secure. Being a master of just one of these is a lifetime achievement. To be an expert in all of them, that is incredibly rare. Okay, so before we dive into the really heavy stuff, let's start with a simple, kind of humanizing fact. Satoshi was a PC user. How do we know that? Well, in the very early days, he actually needed a lot of help from other developers to get the Bitcoin software working on Macs and Linux systems. It's just a tiny detail, but it makes this legendary figure feel a little less like a myth and a bit more, well, human. All right, let's just get right to it. Let's tackle the biggest myth head-on, the idea that Satoshi was some kind of untouchable coding deity. Was the original code for Bitcoin this flawless, perfect masterpiece that nobody could ever improve upon? Well, when you actually look at the code, the story is a little different. So the myth paints this picture of an almost supernatural programmer. But the reality, according to the experts who've picked apart that early code, is that Satoshi was a good, and for that time, even an excellent C++ programmer. But here's the thing, good is not the same as godlike. The code worked, and it worked well enough to get a revolution started, and that's what mattered. And if you need proof, just look at this number. 80%. A staggering 80% of the original Bitcoin code has since been changed or just completely rewritten. Think about that for a second. 4/5 of the original work has been replaced over the years. Now, hang on. This isn't a knock on Satoshi's skills at all. The code wasn't bad. It had to be changed because the Bitcoin network just exploded in ways that no one, not even its creator, could have possibly imagined. It needed to scale up, it needed to connect with wallets and exchanges, all this stuff that didn't even exist when Satoshi was typing out those first few lines. Okay, so if Satoshi wasn't a coding god, then surely his real genius must be in cryptography, right? I mean, it's right there in the name, cryptocurrency. This has to be where the magic is. He must have invented some wild, groundbreaking new cryptographic method. Yeah, this seems like the logical conclusion. If the coding was just good, then the secret sauce, the thing that really makes Bitcoin special, had to be some brand new, uncrackable cryptographic puzzle. That's gotta be where the real invention lies.
It's a totally fair question. You know, the legends in the world of cryptography are the people who invent their own methods. So what was Satoshi's big contribution? What was his signature game-changing algorithm? The answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Satoshi did not invent any new cryptographic tools or primitives. And that right there is probably the biggest surprise when you really start to look under the hood of Bitcoin. See, Satoshi just used existing technologies that were already proven to work. Elliptic curve cryptography, that was suggested way back in 1985. The digital signature algorithm, proposed in 1991. These were battle-tested, well-understood tools that had been around for decades. Satoshi's genius in 2008 wasn't in inventing something new from scratch. It was in the brilliant way he combined them. So if Satoshi wasn't a god-level coder and didn't invent any new cryptography, then where's the genius? What are we even talking about? Well, this brings us to the real masterstroke, the true, incredible nature of Satoshi's innovation. This quote right here gets to the absolute heart of it. Why use old tech? Because it was proven. It works. This wasn't a lazy shortcut. It was a deliberate strategy to avoid risk. When you are trying to build a brand new monetary system for the entire world, you don't gamble on unproven parts. You build your foundation on solid rock, not on sand. So we can actually give this a name: pragmatic innovation. It's the art of creating something completely revolutionary, not by inventing new materials, but by masterfully putting together existing, reliable ones in a way that nobody had ever thought of before. It's about synthesis, not just pure invention. And this is the true genius of Satoshi. He wasn't the inventor of the individual bricks. He was the architect who designed the entire cathedral. A master synthesizer who brilliantly pulled together decades of research from all these different fields into one single working system. A pragmatist who cared more about what worked than what was just new and shiny. And that really leaves us with a final thought, a bigger question. The story of Satoshi kind of forces us to rethink what we even mean by genius or innovation. Does it always have to be about creating something brand new, out of thin air? Or maybe, just maybe, the greatest act of genius is seeing how all the pieces that are already lying right in front of us can fit together in a new way to literally change the world.
Can you imagine creating something that literally changes the world and then just disappearing? Well, that's pretty much the story of Satoshi Nakamoto, the totally anonymous creator of Bitcoin. In this explainer, we're going to try to peel back the layers of this digital ghost and really get inside the mind of a true enigma.
And what they left behind? Well, the scale of it is just staggering. We're talking about a fortune worth roughly $16 billion. A fortune that, get this, has been sitting there, completely untouched, for over a decade. The big question is, why?
So who is this billionaire? I mean, this question is so much bigger than just a name. By digging into their digital breadcrumbs, their emails, their code, their actions, we can start to build a kind of psychological profile of this mysterious figure. And let me tell you, what we find is not what you'd expect.
All right, so where do we even start? Well, our investigation kicks off with a trait that's kind of shocking: humility. Yeah, in a world full of tech titans and massive egos, the creator of this revolutionary technology was, believe it or not, a humble communicator. Let's see how.
People who worked with Satoshi in the early days, they all said the same thing. They described Satoshi's style as calm, precise, and considering. There was no ego, no "I'm smarter than you" vibe, just a really clear, patient effort to explain this world-changing idea.
And this is where things get really interesting. You've got the creator of a multi-billion-dollar technology, and what are they doing? They're spending their time on public forums, patiently answering every single question, even from total beginners. It's a huge clue that this was never about personal gain.
And right here, straight from the source material, you can see the two pillars of Satoshi's personality starting to form. And they are a deep, profound humility and a really shocking lack of interest in money. Honestly, these two traits are the keys to unlocking this whole puzzle.
And this wasn't a one-off thing. This humility was everywhere. Satoshi never acted like the smartest person in the room. They replied to people with loveliness and passion and would patiently answer the same questions over and over. This wasn't about building a personal brand. It was about building a community.
Okay, so Satoshi's humility is surprising, for sure. But their attitude toward their own fortune, it's not just shocking, it is absolutely mind-bending. This is where the story gets really wild.
So here's the number. The estimate is that Satoshi holds around 1 million Bitcoin. Yeah, 1 million. And these were all mined way back in the beginning, when Bitcoin was basically just an obscure project on the internet.
Fast forward to today, and that stash is worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $16 billion. I mean, that's an almost impossible amount of money to even think about, enough to completely change your life forever.
And right here, this is the absolute core of the mystery. For more than a decade, as Bitcoin went from this tiny experiment to a global financial powerhouse, these coins have just sat there, dormant. Not a single one has ever been spent or moved.
Just think about this for a second. Think about all the moments Satoshi could have cashed out. When Bitcoin hit $10, they could have been a millionaire. At 100, a multimillionaire. At 1,000, a billionaire. And on and on. But every single time, nothing. The coins never moved. The level of restraint is just, it's almost superhuman.
So it begs the question, right? What kind of person just walks away from billions of dollars? Well, it's the kind of person who's driven by something way more powerful than money. They're driven by an idea, a philosophy.
And this really breaks down the incredible choice Satoshi made. On one side, you have unimaginable wealth from selling the coins and patenting the software. And on the other side, the choice they actually made, leave the fortune alone and keep the entire project open source as a gift to the world.
You see, this wasn't an accident. Keeping it open source, not touching the coins, it was a deliberate choice. To create a system that was truly decentralized, Satoshi had to completely remove themselves from the equation. Cashing out or patenting the tech would have destroyed the very core of what they were trying to build.
Okay, so let's put the pieces together. We've got this radical humility, right? And then a complete and total rejection of wealth. It all leads to one massive question looming over everything else. What was the real goal here? What was Satoshi's endgame?
And this is where we land, at this beautiful central paradox of Bitcoin's creation. The person who designed a whole new financial system, who basically reinvented money, seemed to have zero interest in money for themselves. It's a riddle wrapped in a mystery right at the heart of this technology.
So when you strip it all away, what's the real legacy here? It's not the billions of dollars sitting in a wallet. It's not the fame or the mystery. It's the technology itself. A decentralized, open-source system given to the world. For Satoshi, it seems like the creation itself was the reward.
And that leaves us right back where we started, with that $16 billion question. If it was never about the money, then what was it all for? Was it a political statement? A grand social experiment? A pure work of digital art? That's the question Satoshi left for all of us to answer. And maybe the mystery is the whole point.
All right, let's dive into one of the biggest mysteries in the world of tech. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin? But we're not really hunting for a person today. We're hunting for a message, a secret clue that might have been hiding in plain sight this whole time. And it all comes down to this one question. When Satoshi created a profile on a public forum, he listed a birthday. Now, was that just some random date he pulled out of thin air? Or was it a very deliberate, symbolic message for anyone clever enough to look? To even begin to crack this code, we have to go back. I mean, way back. To the very beginning, to the birth of Bitcoin itself, and start looking for clues. Our first piece of evidence is buried in what's called the Genesis block. You can think of it as block 0. It is literally the foundation of the entire Bitcoin network, the very first digital domino to fall. So here's where it gets really interesting. What did Satoshi actually put inside this first block? It wasn't just code. No, he embedded this headline from the Times newspaper. Now this did two things. First, it was a timestamp, right? Proof that the block couldn't have been created before January 3rd, 2009. But more importantly, it was a statement, a direct shot at the 2008 financial crisis and the absolute failure of the traditional banking system. And if you had any doubt about his motives, Satoshi just spelled it out a month later. He wrote, "The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work." I mean, he was explicitly calling out central banks for messing with the currency and big banks for being reckless. The key takeaway here, Satoshi wasn't just building a new currency. He was building an alternative to a system that he thought was fundamentally broken. Okay, so we've got the motive, right? A deep, profound distrust of centralized financial power.
Now, let's see how that ties into the main clue in our mystery, that birthday. So, when Satoshi registered his profile on the P2P Foundation website, he entered a date of birth, April 5th, 1975. Now, on the surface, this seems totally normal. If he was born in 1975, he'd be 34 years old in 2009 when he launched Bitcoin. That's a completely plausible age for a brilliant coder. But we already know this guy loves to embed messages, so could this simple date be another one? And to unlock this secret, we need to take a quick detour into American history. Specifically, we need to look at the government's, well, let's just call it a complicated relationship with gold. 2 years on this timeline are absolutely critical. First up, 1933. Right in the middle of the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signs an executive order that makes it illegal for U.S. citizens to privately own gold. They were forced to turn it all over to the government. Then, you fast forward all the way to 1975. The law finally changes, and Americans are once again allowed to legally own gold. And this is where it all clicks. The year Satoshi chose, 1975, the exact year that private gold ownership was made legal again in the U.S. And the day he chose, April 5th, that's the exact date in 1933 that President Roosevelt issued the order to confiscate all that gold. So you have the day representing government seizure and the year representing the return of that financial freedom. So, what are we supposed to make of this? Is this a one-in-a-million unbelievable coincidence? Or is it a totally deliberate, perfectly crafted bit of symbolism from a master storyteller? The final piece of this whole puzzle slots right into place when you remember Bitcoin's most famous nickname, one it's had almost since day one, digital gold. So why do we call it that? Well, just like physical gold, it's scarce. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, period. It also operates completely outside the control of banks and governments. But here's the most important part. Its decentralized design is meant to make it resistant to censorship or confiscation, a direct answer to the exact problem that was symbolized by that 1933 executive order. So, where does all this leave us? The creator of digital gold, a system specifically designed to protect people from government overreach, just so happens to choose a birthday that represents the very day the government took gold away from its citizens and the year that right was given back. Is that a remarkable coincidence, or is it the final poetic signature of a true revolutionary? We might never know for sure, but it's one heck of a story to hide inside a simple date. You know, when we talk about the genius of Bitcoin, our minds usually jump to all the complex stuff, right? Cryptography, the blockchain, decentralized networks. But what if I told you that its most important innovation wasn't a fancy algorithm at all, but actually a single, simple line of code, a line that set up its entire legal future? Let's get into this often overlooked, but absolutely critical story. So, that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. After creating this world-changing technology, what was Satoshi Nakamoto's single most important strategic move? And the answer, you'll see, has nothing to do with mining or wallets. It has everything to do with making sure Bitcoin could actually survive and spread across the entire globe. Okay, so picture it. Satoshi's got the code ready to go, the white paper is all written up, but before just dropping it on the world, there was one last massive decision to make. What kind of software license should it have? Now, this wasn't just some legal checkbox to tick. Nope, this was a choice that would literally define Bitcoin's entire destiny. Now, I'm sure you've heard that Bitcoin is open source, and that's totally true. But here's the thing. Open source isn't just one single thing. It's more like a spectrum, and there are two very, very different philosophies on either side. Satoshi had to pick one, and that choice was going to have some huge consequences. And that leads us to these two fundamental paths for free software. We're not talking about price, by the way. We're talking about freedom and, really, obligation. Satoshi had to figure out which of these philosophies would give Bitcoin the best shot at success. Okay, so this slide breaks down the two main options perfectly. Over on the left, you've got the GPL license. Think of it like a community potluck recipe. You can use it, you can totally change it, but if you make it better, you have to share your new version with everybody. That's why they call it copyleft. But then, on the right, you have the MIT license. This is more like your grandma giving you a family recipe with absolutely no strings attached. You can change it, you can perfect it, you could even build a 5-star restaurant around it, and you never, ever have to share your secret ingredients. It's all about total freedom. So, faced with these two paths, which one did Satoshi take? Well, he went with the one that offered the most freedom, hands down. He chose the MIT license. And this right here really nails it. The MIT license basically says, hey, here's the code, go nuts, do whatever you want with it. There are almost no restrictions. You can copy it, you can tweak it, you can even stick it inside your own private closed source company's software and never share your changes. The key phrase here is maximum user freedom. And this brings up the big question, right? Why? Why would you just give away all that control? Why not force people to share their cool improvements back with the community, like the GPL license does? Well, understanding the why behind this choice, that's how we uncover Satoshi's real grand plan for Bitcoin. And this quote, man, it just says it all. The main goal wasn't to tightly control how the project developed. The goal was for it to go viral, worldwide. Satoshi wanted Bitcoin to be everywhere, in the hands of as many people as possible, totally free for them to experiment with. The license was the key to making that happen. And this slide shows you exactly how that brilliant plan worked. First up, remove the barriers. Any developer, any company could just grab the code and start working without worrying about legal headaches. Step 2, encourage experimentation. A developer could build something amazing on top of Bitcoin without being forced to give away their own secret sauce. And third, and this is the real kicker, it maximized adoption. Big companies could take Bitcoin's code and weave it into their own private systems, which spread the technology way further and faster than it ever could have on its own. You know, the ripple effect from this single decision is it's almost impossible to overstate. It was an absolute masterstroke of game theory. By giving up all that control, Satoshi gave Bitcoin the freedom it needed to explode into the massive, diverse, and, yeah, sometimes chaotic ecosystem that we see all around us today. So what's the big takeaway here? This wasn't some accident. It was a deliberate move. It was an act of decentralization, not just in the tech, but in the very idea of ownership. By choosing freedom over control, just like it says here, Satoshi made sure that no single person or company could ever truly own Bitcoin. It belongs to all of us. And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. Think about it. From every altcoin out there to the entire world of DeFi to huge corporate blockchain projects, so much of the crypto world was built on this foundation of open, permissionless innovation. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of the things we see today are only possible because of this one simple and absolutely brilliant decision made all those years ago? Today, we're jumping headfirst into one of the greatest tech mysteries of our time. It's a puzzle that sits at the very core of the crypto world. We're on the hunt for Satoshi Nakamoto. It seems like such a simple question, right? Who created Bitcoin? But for more than a decade, that one question has kicked off an incredible amount of speculation, deep dive investigations, and some pretty heated debates. So who is the person or people behind it all? Satoshi Nakamoto. I mean, the name itself is legendary, but the person behind the name, a total ghost. They published the Bitcoin white paper back in 2008, mined the very first block of the blockchain, and then, just a few years later, poof, vanished. Now, listen closely to the wording here, because this is where our whole investigation really begins. The unknown person or people. That little word, or, is everything. Was Satoshi a single, lone genius? Or were we looking at a whole team working in the shadows? Let's dig in. Okay, so let's put on our detective hats. Our first big clue comes from just looking at the absolutely insane range of skills you would need to even think of Bitcoin, let alone actually build it from the ground up. Yeah, this was not some weekend coding project. Creating Bitcoin was like trying to be a master architect, a brilliant economist, and a world-class locksmith all at the same time. The amount of knowledge required is just staggering. I mean, just look at this list. You have to be an expert in economics and the history of money. Then you also need to be a wizard at distributed computing and databases. On top of that, you have to be a top-tier C++ programmer. And as if that's not enough, you also have to be a genius-level cryptographer. That is a wild, wild mix of talents. And that's the real head-scratcher, isn't it? Each one of these subjects is a career in itself, a lifelong study. So the idea that a single person could be a true master of all five, well, it's not just unlikely. It's pushing the boundaries of what seems possible. Let's put it this way. Your typical cryptography expert, they live and breathe complex math and security protocols. That's their world. They're not usually also experts in economic theory. And then you have your brilliant C++ coder. They're masters of programming, sure, but that doesn't mean they've spent years studying peer-to-peer monetary systems. These skill sets just don't overlap very often at an expert level. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. It's a simple fact of life, you know? We only have so much time. Mastering even one of these fields is a life's work. This piece of evidence points a giant flashing arrow at the idea that Bitcoin was the work of a team.
All right, so let's move on to clue number 2. This one is a little different. It's not about complex skills. It's about one tiny word, hidden in plain sight in the most important Bitcoin document ever written. We're going straight to the source here, the original Bitcoin white paper. The answer might have been staring us in the face this whole time. We're zooming in on the abstract, just 5 sentences in. And there it is. Listen to that again. We propose a solution, not I propose a solution. We. Now that is fascinating. We. In academic and technical writing, your choice of words is everything. It's deliberate. Using we instead of I is a conscious choice, and it points directly toward a collaboration, suggesting that multiple people had a hand in this.
So we have an impossible skill set and a plural pronoun. It's starting to feel like case closed, right? It was a group. But hold on. What if it's not that simple? What if that clue was actually a trap? It is so tempting to just say, yep, mystery solved. The evidence for a team is pretty strong, but we've got to consider the alternative, a much more cunning explanation for that little word.
And here's the twist. What if the use of we wasn't a slip-up at all? What if it was planted there on purpose, to throw us all off the trail? The thing you have to remember is that whoever Satoshi was, they were incredibly careful. They knew how important it was to stay anonymous. So by using we, a single creator could make it much, much harder to track them down. It's a brilliant way to hide in plain sight if you're trying to remain a ghost. So where does that leave us? We've got 2 pretty solid clues pointing to a group, and one very clever counter theory that suggests it was a lone genius covering their tracks. Let's put it all together and see what makes the most sense. Okay, let's break it down. In the group column, we've got 2 heavy hitters. The skill set required is just ridiculously broad for one person. And the white paper literally says we. Pretty strong. Then in the individual column, we have the theory that this was all a clever misdirection. And after you weigh both sides, while that misdirection theory is smart, the argument about the impossible combination of skills is just, it's a really tough one to get around. The balance of evidence really seems to tilt in favor of Satoshi Nakamoto being a group of people. And that's where we'll leave it. The idea of a single anonymous creator is a powerful myth, right? But what if the reality is a story of collaboration? Does that make Bitcoin's origin more compelling or less? You could almost say that a team-based creation perfectly reinforces Bitcoin's decentralized spirit from day one. Definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in. All right, let's get right into it. Today, we are cracking open one of the biggest mysteries in modern technology, the case of Satoshi Nakamoto. Was the person, or people, who created Bitcoin a lone genius working in secret, or was it a whole team? Let's dig into the clues. So just think about this for a second. Who's the most influential inventor of our time that nobody has ever actually seen? I mean, a lot of names and faces probably pop into your head when you think of innovation. But the one who created an entirely new multi-trillion-dollar asset class, who literally kicked off a global financial revolution, yeah, that person is a complete and total ghost. And that is the mystery we're talking about today. Okay, so to figure this out, let's treat it like a real detective case. And our first clue, our first piece of evidence, really has to do with the psychology, the kind of mind it would take to create something like Bitcoin. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. The source material we're looking at suggests that truly revolutionary creations, things that are this detailed, this elegant, they almost always come from a single obsessive mind. Think about it. A masterpiece painting or a groundbreaking novel is almost never made by a committee, right? The argument here is that Bitcoin's design is so incredibly focused, so cohesive. It just feels like the product of one person's singular, powerful vision. Okay, so that's the psychological profile. Let's move on to our next clue, which is a bit more forensic. We're going to look at the digital trail, the breadcrumbs that Satoshi left behind.
This quote from our source really just says it all. You've got researchers who have pored over every single known email, every forum post from Satoshi, and what they found is pretty amazing. The writing style, everything from using British English spellings to very specific phrases and technical terms, it's unbelievably consistent over years. It's like it has a single, unique digital fingerprint. And this slide really breaks down why that fingerprint is so important. See, a single person, well, they naturally have a consistent voice, but a team, that's a whole different story. A team would have to perfectly mimic one person's style across every single email, every post, for years, without a single person slipping up. The chances of pulling that off without anyone noticing, it's just incredibly unlikely. So this brings us to clue number 3. And honestly, this might be the most powerful argument of them all. It's not about personality or writing styles, it's about the cold, hard logic of just trying to keep a secret. I mean, this is just a fundamental truth about, well, being human, right? Every single person who knows a secret is a potential leak. So the more people you have involved in this Satoshi identity, the greater the chance that one of them talks, whether it's by accident, for money, or just for the fame. Let's just break that down really simply. If Satoshi is just one person, that secret is basically locked in a vault. Add a second person, you've just doubled your risk of a leak. If it's 3 or more people, well, the odds of that secret staying hidden start to shrink pretty fast. Over time, a leak becomes almost inevitable. And just think about how long this secret has been kept. We're talking over 16 years now, since the Bitcoin white paper came out back in 2008. And in all that time, not a single person has ever come forward with real, verifiable proof that they were part of a Satoshi team. Think about the temptation, the book deals, the fame, the money. The idea that an entire group of people could resist all of that and stay completely silent for this long, it just defies belief. So, okay. We have the profile of a lone genius. We've got a consistent digital fingerprint, and we have the pure unlikelihood of a group keeping a secret of this magnitude for this long. Let's put it all on the scales and see how it all weighs out. So let's look at this. The biggest piece of evidence for a group is that Satoshi sometimes used the word we in the white paper, like we propose. Okay, but now look at the evidence for an individual. You've got a single name on the paper, a single contact email, that incredibly consistent and unique writing style we talked about, and the overwhelming logic of keeping a secret for more than 16 years. The scale here seems to tip very, very heavily to one side. So here's the bottom line. The source material basically concludes that, look, you can't 100% rule out a tiny, super disciplined team of maybe 2 or 3 people. But the sheer weight of all the evidence we've just walked through, it just points so strongly toward a single creator, a lone genius who built this world-changing technology and then just vanished. And that leaves us with this final kind of mind-bending question to chew on. Satoshi Nakamoto created a technology that is all about transparency, about a public record, yet they themselves achieved a level of personal anonymity that seems almost impossible in our world today. So, in an age where everyone is constantly connected, constantly sharing, is the ability to build something that changes the world and then just walk away in total silence the ultimate mark of a genius? So who is Satoshi Nakamoto? It's got to be one of the biggest mysteries in the entire world of tech, right? But, for this one crazy moment back in 2014, everybody was convinced the search was finally over. This whole thing, though, it isn't just a story about mistaken identity. It's really a cautionary tale about how fast a wrong idea can spread and just how hard it is to put that genie back in the bottle. And this was it. March 2014, a bombshell cover from Newsweek. And notice, it wasn't a question. It was a statement, a bold declaration, the face behind Bitcoin. Newsweek was basically telling the world they'd found him. They'd unmasked the reclusive genius, this digital ghost who kicked off a whole financial revolution. The article pointed its finger at this one, seemingly totally ordinary man living in California, and the entire crypto world and pretty soon the rest of the media just held its breath. Everyone was ready to finally meet the father of crypto. There was just one tiny problem. What if they got the wrong guy? Okay, so how did pretty much the whole world get convinced? Well, the case against this man, a guy named Dorian Nakamoto, was built on a series of coincidences that honestly seemed just a little too perfect. I mean, the circumstantial evidence was almost unbelievable. First, you got the name, Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. I mean, come on, what are the odds? Then you find out he lived just a few blocks away from Hal Finney, the very first person to ever receive a Bitcoin transaction from the real Satoshi. Add in that he was a systems engineer and was kind of secretive about his old government contract work, and well, you've got the perfect recipe for a media firestorm. And that secrecy, that was like pouring gasoline on the fire. When reporters started asking questions, Dorian was pretty evasive about his past projects. To a media that was starving for this story, that didn't sound like a private citizen wanting some privacy. No, that sounded like the caginess of a reclusive genius. And just like that, a global manhunt had ended on this quiet suburban doorstep, and Dorian Nakamoto's life was about to be turned completely inside out. But as this media circus just got more and more intense, some cracks started to show up in the story. And the very first crack? It came from the suspect himself. There was no carefully crafted PR statement, no clever way to dodge the question. It was just the raw, completely baffled words of a man who was utterly lost in a media storm. Surrounded by reporters, his message was as simple and as direct as it gets. He had absolutely nothing to do with Bitcoin. And the gap between the story the media was telling and the actual reality, it was staggering. I mean, they painted this picture of a secretive founder hiding his world-changing creation. The reality? A guy who, by all accounts, had never even heard of Bitcoin before. They saw this brilliant cryptographer. He had no clue what a blockchain even was. The so-called reclusive billionaire was, in fact, just a very confused private citizen, caught in a hurricane he couldn't possibly understand. So Dorian's denial was pretty compelling, but you know the internet. The army of digital detectives out there, they wanted cold, hard proof. They decided to look right past the headlines and actually dig into the data, moving from all these circumstantial coincidences to find something definitive. And it turns out the real clue wasn't in his address or his old job title. It was in his words. These internet sleuths started looking at Dorian's publicly available writings, emails, old posts, anything they could find, looking for a match with the very distinct voice of the real creator of Bitcoin. The technique they used is called stylometric analysis. Now, think of it like a linguistic fingerprint, right? We all have a unique style, the way we phrase things, the punctuation we use, even our common mistakes. The analysts compared Dorian's known writing style to the writing of the real Satoshi, which you can find in the famous Bitcoin white paper and all those early forum posts. And the results? They were totally unambiguous. The writing styles, the technical vocabulary, the phrasing, all of it was a complete and total mismatch. The person who wrote the Bitcoin white paper and the person whose emails they were looking at were, without a shadow of a doubt, two different people. Case closed. But the story? Oh, it was far from over. So Dorian was cleared. The reason this whole thing still matters so much, though, is because even when the facts proved him innocent, the internet, well, the internet never forgets. And sometimes it remembers the wrong things. Seriously, even today, if you do a quick image search for Satoshi Nakamoto, you're probably going to see Dorian's face over and over again. The false story has become this permanent digital artifact, like an echo of a headline that was proven wrong years and years ago. It's a textbook example of what we call a misinformation loop, and it's deceptively simple. Some curious person searches for the founder of Bitcoin, the search engine shows them pictures from the biggest, most famous news story on that topic, and that person just walks away believing that a man who had absolutely nothing to do with it is the reclusive genius they were looking for. Look, the story of Dorian Nakamoto is just a really stark reminder that in our age of instant information, the most sensational story is often the one that wins, even when it's dead wrong. It just goes to show that we can't just consume information. We have to question it, especially when the story seems just a little too perfect to be true. An ordinary man's life was completely turned upside down by one single article that got the facts spectacularly wrong. And it really leaves us with a critical question to think about. What story, big or small, have you accepted as fact without ever really truly questioning it?
All right, let's dive into one of the biggest, most persistent mysteries in the entire crypto world. It's a wild story about identity, about proof, and really about what happens when someone tries to put their name on a revolutionary idea that was born from anonymity.
Yeah, this is the question, isn't it? It's the one that has had the crypto community buzzing for, over a decade now. Who is the real Satoshi Nakamoto?
So think about this. The creator of Bitcoin, this figure we only know as Satoshi, drops the now famous white paper in 2008, sticks around for a few years to get the project off the ground, and then, poof,
just vanishes from the internet in 2011. He left behind a multi-billion-dollar invention and a complete and total mystery.
For years, there was just silence, crickets. Then, all of a sudden, one man steps right into the spotlight, claiming he was the genius everyone had been looking for.
So let's look at how this unfolded. After Satoshi disappeared in 2011, 5 whole years went by. Then, out of nowhere, in 2016, an Australian academic and businessman, Dr. Craig Wright, does something nobody saw coming. He publicly announces that he is Satoshi Nakamoto.
And right from the jump, Wright's whole vibe was just defiant. I mean, he invites the BBC over for this huge reveal and then basically says, "I don't really care if you believe me." It was a really strange way to go about proving your identity to the entire world, you know?
And you can bet that attitude immediately sent up some major red flags all over the Bitcoin community. It led everyone to ask a really crucial question. Does this guy's personality even remotely match the person we knew from Bitcoin's early days?
The difference was just night and day. On one side, you've got the original Satoshi, someone who obsessed over anonymity and was known for being super patient, explaining every little detail. And on the other side, you have Craig Wright, who's courting the media, being dismissive, and using a ton of confusing buzzwords instead of just explaining things clearly. The two just didn't add up.
Okay, so personality is one thing, but in the world of crypto, proof is everything. It's the whole ball game. So what actual hard proof did Wright bring to the table?
Well, this is where the story goes from just weird to truly bizarre. Wright's proof was a private demo for a BBC reporter. But get this, the whole thing wasn't recorded, the reporter had zero expertise in cryptography, so he wouldn't even know what he was looking at, and crucially, Wright never ever publicly proved he had access to the early Bitcoin wallets that the real Satoshi controlled. For the crypto community, this was, to put it lightly, a massive disappointment. And that just begs the question, right? Satoshi Nakamoto literally invented proof of work, the engine that makes Bitcoin run. Would the master of cryptographic proof really choose to prove who he is through a reporter who doesn't understand the tech in some private, unrecorded meeting? It just doesn't make sense.
The incredible irony here is that the real Satoshi had a dead simple, 100% undeniable way to prove their identity. They could have just moved a tiny piece of a Bitcoin from an early wallet or signed a message with a private key. That would have been game over, no questions asked. But instead, Wright chose.
So with all this evidence, or really the complete lack of it, piling up, the Bitcoin community started to come to a pretty firm conclusion on its own.
The community's case against him basically boiled down to 4 huge contradictions. 1. Publicity. Satoshi hit from the spotlight, Wright ran towards it. 2. Attitude. Satoshi was helpful, Wright was dismissive. 3. Proof. Satoshi would have used code, Wright used the media. And finally, number 4, allegiance. Satoshi created Bitcoin, Wright was out there promoting a competitor, Bitcoin Cash.
But maybe the most damning evidence of all was what he didn't do. People were asking, hey, if you created Bitcoin, why aren't you helping us solve its biggest technical problems? And the conclusion from a whole lot of people was, well, pretty blunt. It seemed like he just didn't have the coding skills.
And so a nickname was born. Across the Bitcoin world, Craig Wright became widely known as Fake Satoshi. It was a clear sign that for most people, the debate was over.
And then, believe it or not, comes the final twist. After all that drama, by early 2018, reports came out that Craig Wright himself had stated that he was not, in fact, Satoshi.
So the final verdict was pretty clear. That big announcement in 2016 wasn't some grand revelation. For almost everyone in the community, it was just an act, a publicity stunt to get fame and attention. And so, the bizarre case of Craig Wright seems pretty much closed. But it leaves us right back where we started. With this one big claim debunked, the central, electrifying question at the very heart of Bitcoin is still hanging in the air, unanswered. Who is the real Satoshi Nakamoto?
For over a decade, the identity of Bitcoin's creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, has been one of the internet's biggest, most fascinating unsolved mysteries. So today, we're going to do more than just talk about theories. We're actually opening up the case file on a prime suspect and following the trail of evidence.
So who is Satoshi Nakamoto? I mean, that's the big question, right?
Who is the person, or maybe even the group of people, who used that name to unleash a technology that would, well, go on to change the world?
Think about it. After releasing the Bitcoin white paper and launching the network, Satoshi just vanished. Poof! Gone. Around 2011. They left behind this digital ghost, a legacy now worth billions, and a puzzle that people have been trying to solve ever since. And you know, all that relentless searching has led a lot of investigators to one name in particular, Adam Back. He's a British cryptographer whose profile, as you're about to see, fits the creator of Bitcoin almost a little too perfectly. Let's dig into the clues. All right, so first up, let's build the case for Adam Back. We're going to walk through all the evidence piece by piece so you can see for yourself exactly why so many people are convinced he's the man behind the mystery. The first thing that just jumps out at you is that on paper, Adam Back's resume is a near perfect match. He's got the right academic background, he's a wizard with C++, which is the language Bitcoin is written in, and here's the real kicker. He invented Hashcash. That's a proof of work system that is literally a foundational concept cited right there in the Bitcoin white paper. But you know, it's not just his technical skills that raise eyebrows. Investigators found something that's maybe even more suspicious. A long period of total radio silence from a guy who, up until then, was constantly publishing papers and filing patents. Just look at this timeline. It's kind of wild. Before 2005, Adam Back was constantly putting out new work. Then, for 5 straight years, nothing. And what happens smack dab in the middle of that professional black hole? Yep, Bitcoin is released. Then, just as suddenly as he went quiet, he's back at it in 2010. The timing is, you have to admit, incredibly suspicious. And then there's the way they write. The linguistic evidence is just uncanny. I mean, sure, they both use British English, which makes sense, but the real tell for a lot of people is that they both use a double space after a period. It's such a specific little formatting quirk, kind of like a digital fingerprint, that really links the two of them together. And finally, you have that famous message hidden in Bitcoin's very first block. It's a headline from the Times newspaper from January 3rd, 2009. The Times is, of course, classic British paper, and Adam Back is, of course, British, born and raised in London. So you've got the tech skills, that suspicious 5-year gap, the identical writing style, and the London connection. I mean, it seems like an open and shut case, right? Well, there's one massive piece of evidence that could unravel this whole theory. Okay, so now we have to turn to the case against. Because despite all that compelling evidence we just looked at, the single biggest piece of counter-evidence comes from the suspect himself. Adam Back has repeatedly, publicly, and very, very clearly denied being Satoshi Nakamoto. And we're not talking about some vague statement or clever non-answer. It's a direct, unambiguous, I am not Satoshi. So how in the world does he explain that mountain of evidence? Well, he basically chalks it all up to coincidence. In his own words, facts are untidy. He's arguing that, when you look back, it's easy to connect dots that aren't actually there. And what's so fascinating is he doesn't even dispute the core facts. He freely admits he's a C++ coder from London. He confirms he uses British English and those double spaces. He even says he was one of the very first people Satoshi ever emailed about Bitcoin, way back in 2008. He just says all of these suspicious facts are nothing more than an incredible series of coincidences. So, this all brings us to our final section, an unsolved mystery. With a mountain of circumstantial evidence on one side and a firm, consistent denial on the other, where does that leave us in the quest to finally unmask Satoshi? And this is really the heart of the dilemma. The circumstantial case against Adam Back is incredibly compelling. You could argue it's stronger than for any other candidate out there. But at the end of the day, without definitive proof, it's still just circumstantial. And it all runs straight into the wall of his consistent denial. But maybe the most interesting part of Adam Back's whole defense is his argument for why Satoshi should stay anonymous. He actually suggests that the creator being a mystery isn't a flaw. He thinks it's Bitcoin's greatest strength. And here's his reasoning. With an anonymous creator, there's no single leader you can pressure or corrupt. There's no founder you can make demands of. The fact that Satoshi is a ghost forces Bitcoin to be treated more like a commodity, like digital gold, instead of a company with a CEO. In his view, that leaderlessness is its greatest feature. And that leaves us with the ultimate question. After all this searching,
maybe the most important thing about Satoshi Nakamoto is that we just don't know who they are. Maybe Satoshi's true genius wasn't just in writing the code for Bitcoin, but in knowing when to disappear and let the creation live on its own. What do you think? All right, today we're cracking open one of the biggest case files in modern tech, the mystery of who really created Bitcoin. Yeah, this is the question, isn't it? The one that's kicked off countless investigations. The name Satoshi Nakamoto is right there on the original Bitcoin white paper, but the actual person, or maybe even a group of people behind that name, they've been a total ghost since day one. For more than a decade now, all sorts of people, journalists, hardcore researchers, cryptographers, have tried to unmask this figure. But after creating and launching the world's first truly successful cryptocurrency, Satoshi just poof, vanished, without a trace. But what if the breadcrumb trail has been there the entire time? Hiding right in front of us? Today, we're going to follow that trail and see exactly where it leads. Now, that trail has led investigators to a few different people over the years. But there is one name that just keeps rising to the top of the list, and it's backed by a whole stack of really compelling evidence. That name? Nick Shaga. I mean, just on paper, Szabo's resume is perfect. He's a brilliant computer scientist who is a key part of the whole cypherpunk scene, which is exactly where the core ideas for Bitcoin were being hashed out. But as you're about to see, it goes way deeper than just his credentials. Here's where it gets kind of weird. Szabo is an intensely private guy. We're talking, we don't know where he lives, we have no idea where he went to school, we don't even know if Nick Szabo is his real name. He's basically a ghost in his own right, which, you have to admit, only makes him look more suspicious. Okay, so where does the real evidence begin? Well, it starts with a project that looks suspiciously like a blueprint for Bitcoin itself, a little something called BitGold. That's right. A full decade before Satoshi ever published the Bitcoin white paper, Nick Szabo had already conceptualized and designed an incredibly similar system for a decentralized digital currency. So you're probably asking, okay, how similar are we talking here? Well, let me tell you, the parallels are genuinely stunning. Just look at this side-by-side comparison. The similarities in the architecture are just striking. Both use a proof-of-work system. Both are peer-to-peer. In both systems, you solve cryptographic puzzles to get currency. And here's the big one, the absolute key. Both were designed to work without needing a trusted third party, like a bank. The core DNA is practically identical. And this, my friends, is where the plot really thickens. Satoshi was actually very careful to credit the projects and the academic papers that influenced Bitcoin's design. It was a sign of respect. Go ahead and take a look at the actual reference list from the white paper. You'll see citations for concepts like B-money and hashcash. Satoshi was diligent, giving credit where credit was due. But given those incredible similarities we just saw, there is one glaring, almost unbelievable omission from this list. Yeah, BitGold's, the one project that could easily be called Bitcoin's direct predecessor, is just nowhere to be found. So why would Satoshi reference other, less similar systems, but leave out the most obvious one? Unless, of course, you don't really need to cite your own previous work. And think about this for a second, because this is the real kicker. If someone else took an idea you had a decade ago, turned it into a world-changing technology, and didn't even give you a shout-out, wouldn't you say something? Nick Szabo never did. Not a peep. His silence is deafening. So let's move on to the next exhibit in our case file, the words themselves. Researchers have used this really cool technique called stylometry. It's basically like linguistic fingerprinting to analyze Satoshi's writing. Back in 2013, one researcher, a guy named Sky Gray, ran this analysis and came to a pretty jaw-dropping conclusion. After hunting for Satoshi's unique writing style, his quirks, he found a perfect match. And this right here shows you exactly why. I mean, look at this. Satoshi and Szabo use the exact same, often pretty uncommon phrases. Expressions like timestamp server, trusted third party, and they both had this distinct habit of starting sentences with "it should be noted." It creates a seriously powerful linguistic link between them. Okay, so if the technical blueprint and the linguistic fingerprint aren't enough for you, there's one more layer of circumstantial clues that make the case against Szabo even more compelling. Let's start with something simple, almost too simple. Satoshi Nakamoto, SN, Nick Szabo, NS. A simple anagram. Now, is that just a coincidence? Maybe. But trust me, the coincidences are just getting started. We actually know from his blog that Sabo had a pretty clear interest in Japanese history and their markets long before Bitcoin ever showed up. So the theory goes that he might have created a Japanese pen name kind of similar to his own. Sabo becomes Satoshi. Nick becomes Nakamoto. It's speculative, for sure, but it fits the pattern. And then you've got this timeline. This is huge. So check this out. April 2008, Nick Szabo posts on his blog looking for developers to help him finally code BitGold. Just 6 months later, boom, Satoshi Nakamoto publishes the Bitcoin white paper. But here's the real kicker. After Bitcoin was released, Szabo actually went back and changed the date on his original blog post to make it look like he wrote it after the Bitcoin paper came out. Now, why would you do that unless you were trying to cover your tracks? So what does the man himself say about all this? Well, when he's been confronted with all this evidence, Nick Szabo has given a simple, direct denial. That's it. No detailed takedown of the evidence, just a short, polite brush-off. So what do you think? Is all of this just a massive, unbelievable mountain of coincidences? Or is this the carefully laid trail of a brilliant creator who wanted to give his invention to the world and then just walk away? The evidence is all there, but the final verdict? Well, that's up to you.
So who is Satoshi Nakamoto? You know, the anonymous creator of Bitcoin. It's got to be one of the internet's greatest, most enduring mysteries. But what if the answer has been hiding in plain sight this whole time? Today, we're going to dive into the life of Hal Finney, who is, without a doubt, one of the most compelling candidates for the person behind the name. And the evidence, well, it suggests the answer was right there from the very beginning.
It all started with a simple test. January 12, 2009. A few digital coins traveled across the internet for the very first time. It was a quiet little moment, but it was the one that would eventually spark a complete revolution in finance.
And the person on the other end of that historic transaction? A computer scientist named Hal Finney. He was there from the absolute start, a true pioneer who saw the potential when pretty much nobody else did. He wasn't just watching from the sidelines, he was right there, participating in Bitcoin's very first moments.
And that, right there, brings us to the biggest question of this whole story. We know for a fact he received those first Bitcoins. But could it be that he was also the one who sent them? Was Hal Finney just talking to himself, running a test on his very own creation?
To really understand this theory, you first have to get a sense of Hal's role in all of this. He wasn't just some random guy Satoshi picked out of a hat. He was, in so many ways, the first true believer in the entire project.
I mean, listen to his own words. Hal said, "I think I was the first person besides Satoshi to run Bitcoin." He downloaded the software the moment it was announced, he mined some of the earliest blocks, and he was actively reporting bugs, helping to get the network stable in those first crucial days.
And that first transaction we were talking about, it was for 10 Bitcoins. Now, that doesn't sound like much today, but back then, it was everything. It was Satoshi sending the coins to Hal just to see if it worked. A simple little transfer that proved the whole concept was real. So the key takeaway here is that Hal was absolutely essential to Bitcoin from block one.
Okay, so he was an early enthusiast for sure. But did he have the technical chops to actually build Bitcoin? Well, one look at his resume shows he wasn't just qualified, he was, uniquely positioned to be its creator.
You see, Hal was a leading member of the Cypherpunks. This was this movement of people who had been working for decades on the very ideas that Bitcoin is built on. Digital privacy, decentralized systems, cryptographic money. These weren't just programmers, they were idealists fighting for a cause.
And his expertise? It was undeniable. He worked on PGP, which is still the gold standard for email encryption. He ran the first anonymous remailer, a kind of precursor to privacy tools like Tor. And here's the kicker. In 2004, years before Bitcoin even existed, he created RPOW, his own digital currency based on proof of work. As he once put it, he was a cryptographic graybeard. He'd been in the trenches for years.
All right, so with that background, let's turn to the direct clues, even if they are circumstantial, that point to the very real possibility that Hal Finney and Satoshi Nakamoto were one and the same person.
Okay, this first one is it's astonishing. For over a decade, Hal Finney lived in the same town, just a short distance from a man whose name was, get this, Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. The theory here is that Hal might have used his neighbor's name as a patsy, a really clever bit of misdirection to throw everyone off his trail.
Then you've got the timing. Satoshi Nakamoto just vanishes from the internet in late 2010, handing over the project to other developers. And then, just a few months later, in early 2011, Hal Finney is forced to retire from his job because of a sudden illness. The fact that these two events happened so close together, it's pretty hard to ignore.
And this brings us right back to where we started. Think about it. If you invented a system like Bitcoin, what's the very first thing you'd do? You'd probably test it, right? Maybe send a transaction from one of your computers to another, just to see both sides of the process. So, is it possible that first transaction wasn't between two different people at all, but just one creator testing his own work?
But you know, this isn't just a technical mystery full of clues. To really, truly understand Hal Finney, we have to look at the powerful and honestly heartbreaking story that he shared with the world in his final years.
In his very last post on the Bitcoin Talk forum, Hal revealed that just months after Bitcoin launched, he was diagnosed with ALS. Think about that timing. At the beginning of 2009, he was in the best shape of his life, even training for a marathon. By August, his body had already started to fail him.
The disease was just relentless. Eventually, he was completely paralyzed, needing tubes to eat and breathe. And yet, and this is what's so incredible, he found a way to keep working, using an eye-tracking system to control his computer and keep writing code.
And what an amazing statement this is. Even in that state, he was still coding, working to make Bitcoin wallets more secure. He said it was 50 times slower for him, but his passion for his work just never, ever faded. It gave him purpose.
He talked about those early Bitcoins not like he'd hit the jackpot, but as something he was lucky to have, a legacy for his family. There was no ego there, just this quiet satisfaction with the part he played. I'm comfortable with my legacy. Just incredible.
Hal Finney passed away in 2014, and he took any secrets he might have had with him. He always denied being Satoshi, but when you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, the mystery really only gets deeper. So let's just recap the whole case, right? He had the skills, the cypherpunk ideals, and the earliest possible involvement. He lived just a short drive from a guy literally named Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. The timeline of his illness lines up almost perfectly with Satoshi's disappearance. And of course, he was on the receiving end of that very first transaction. It really makes you wonder if his public denials were just a final act to shield his family from the insane spotlight that would come with being known as Bitcoin's creator.
So in the end, we're left with this question. If Hal Finney was Satoshi, then his choice to stay anonymous wasn't about hiding. It was about protecting his family from harassment and danger, and maybe, just maybe, protecting Bitcoin itself from having a single fallible person at the top. We may never know for sure, but the legacy of Hal Finney, the brilliant cryptographer and Bitcoin's very first believer, is without a doubt right at the heart of this story.
All right, let's dive into one of the greatest mysteries of the digital age. For well over a decade, the identity of Bitcoin's creator has been this epic puzzle. But what if the biggest clue has been hiding right in front of us this whole time? Yeah, this is the big one, isn't it? Satoshi Nakamoto, the name behind Bitcoin, an identity so perfectly hidden it's become the stuff of legend. But here's a thought. What if we've been asking the wrong question? What if the answer isn't a who, but a they? For years, all anyone's had to go on is a name, that game-changing white paper, and a few forum posts. And then, poof, the creator just vanished into thin air. And this is exactly where our story takes a fascinating turn. We're going to dig into a theory that completely flips this mystery on its head. What if we've all been chasing a single ghost when we should have been looking for a duo? This brings us to the heart of it all, the duo theory. The idea is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. What if Satoshi Nakamoto wasn't some lone genius, but a secret collaboration between two absolute legends of the crypto world? So, meet our two main players, Hal Finney and Nick Szabo. I mean, look at this. On paper, they're practically mirror images of each other. Both were brilliant cryptographers, both were key members of the Cypherpunk movement, and, super important, they knew each other. They'd been bouncing ideas around for years. You can see how the stage was already set for them to team up, right? Okay, so how do we get from a professional friendship to a secret partnership that created Bitcoin? Well, let's start connecting the clues, one by one, and really build this case. Our first clue actually comes from Nick Szabo. He was the brain behind BitGold, which was one of the very first concepts for a decentralized digital currency. He had the vision, the big idea, but he needed someone to actually code it. He even publicly asked for a collaborator. But if you look at the public record, crickets. Nobody replied.
And that is the million-dollar question. Just because we can't see a public reply doesn't mean no one answered the call. What if the perfect person for the job, a master coder who totally got the vision, just reached out behind the scenes?
So here's how it could have gone down. You've got Szabo, the theorist, putting out the ask. Then you have Finney, the expert programmer, who privately says, I'm in, I'll build it. In return, Szabo takes the lead on the white paper and communications. And to keep themselves safe, they cook up a shared pseudonym, Satoshi Nakamoto. It's just a perfect matchup of skills.
You know, sometimes the most telling clue is what's not there. And if you look really, really closely at the Bitcoin white paper, there's a glaring omission. It's kind of weird.
Check this out. Hal Finney's project, RPOW, was the direct technical ancestor to Bitcoin's proof-of-work system. And Nick Szabo's BitGold was its closest conceptual blueprint. These were, without a doubt, the two most relevant projects out there. And yet, neither one is mentioned, not once. They're not cited anywhere in the Bitcoin white paper.
I mean, that just begs the question, why? In any technical paper, you cite your sources, your influences. It's standard practice. To leave out the true projects you're building on most directly, that's almost unheard of. Unless, of course, the authors were deliberately trying to cover their own tracks.
And now we come to what might be the final piece of the puzzle. And the crazy thing is, this clue has been hiding in plain sight from day one, in the very first sentence of the Bitcoin white paper's abstract.
So take a look at the quote. This is it. This is the line that launched a multi-trillion-dollar revolution. But I want you to pay very, very close attention to that first word.
Yep, the language itself is the clue. The white paper doesn't say I propose, it says we propose. From the very first sentence, the author or authors used a plural pronoun. It strongly suggests that it was never a single person to begin with.
So let's just recap the case here. You've got two pioneers with a history together and perfectly matched skills. You have the super suspicious absence of their own essential work from the white paper, and to top it off, you have the creator of Bitcoin literally referring to themselves as we. Now look, is this definitive proof? Does it close the case? No. It is still a theory, it's speculation. But when you lay all the evidence out like this, it paints an incredibly compelling picture. It's definitely not impossible.
The identity of Satoshi Nakamoto is still one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in tech today. And while all these clues pointing to a partnership are fascinating, without that final definitive proof, the case file has to remain open.
So we're left with this question. Could it be that for over a decade, we've been searching for one person, when the answer might have been a duo, hiding in plain sight all along? The mystery continues.
Today, we are diving into one of the biggest, most fascinating mysteries of our time. Who exactly is Satoshi Nakamoto, the person or people who created Bitcoin? This is a real-life detective story, so let's get into it.
Right, this is the big question, isn't it? Who is Satoshi Nakamoto? You got this name on a white paper, this ghost in the machine who basically dropped a world-changing technology on us and then, poof, just vanished. Yeah, for years now, you've had journalists, amateur sleuths, and a whole lot of crypto fans just chasing shadows, trying to figure out who's behind the name. So, where do you even start looking?
Well, our first stop has to be with the one person Satoshi seemed to trust above all others, an American software developer named Gavin Andresen. He was there, right in the thick of it, from the very early days.
You know, it all started with a pretty simple email back in 2010. Satoshi, who up until then had been the only public contact for Bitcoin, just reaches out to Gavin. And it might have looked like just a small website update, but what it really was the first step in a very careful, very deliberate disappearing act.
And look at how this played out. Satoshi didn't just add Gavin's name. No, he removed his own. He completely replaced himself. With just a few clicks, the torch was passed, and Gavin Andresen became the new public face of Bitcoin. I mean, that tells you this whole exit was planned out, right?
And this was pretty much the last thing Gavin heard. A final, super cryptic message. Satoshi mentions this weird invitation to talk to the CIA about Bitcoin. And after that email, nothing. Just complete radio silence.
The creator was gone.
So here's the thing. Even though Gavin was the hand-picked successor, he's always denied being Satoshi. And honestly, most people in the community agree with him. He even got behind another guy for a little while, Craig Wright, but he later took that back. So if it wasn't the guy Satoshi himself chose, then who else could it possibly be?
And this is where the whole thing just gets messy. Over the years, so many names have been tossed out there, but almost every single one has turned into a dead end. It's just a long trail of people saying, nope, wasn't me. So for instance, you have the theorist Ted Nelson, who was convinced it was this Japanese mathematician Shinichi Mochizuki. Mochizuki's response? A hard no. Then you've got Dave Kleinman, a computer forensics expert who passed away in 2013. The problem is, there's no real evidence linking him to the cypherpunk movement where all this started. So that one seems pretty unlikely too.
Okay, but now we get to what I think is one of the most compelling theories out there. It's all about timing in a really clever analogy. What if Satoshi's other project wasn't some secret thing, but another cryptocurrency you've definitely heard of?
I mean, just look at this timeline. It's fascinating. Just as Satoshi is fading out in early 2011, another brilliant mind, Charlie Lee, launches Litecoin later that same year. You got to admit, that timing is incredibly suspicious.
And here's the real kicker. It was Charlie Lee himself who came up with this analogy. He said, hey, if Bitcoin is digital gold, then Litecoin is digital silver. Think about that. It's not just some marketing slogan. It hints at this bigger vision of two complementary assets, one for storing value, one for everyday transactions. It's the perfect story for a founder moving on to their next big thing, isn't it?
Now, of course, just like everybody else, Charlie Lee says he's not Satoshi. But given his background at Google, his serious tech skills, and that just too perfect timing, he's got to be one of the most believable suspects out there. A lot of people think so anyway. All right, now we're going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit. Because when you have a mystery this huge, you know the theories are going to get wild. We're talking tech billionaires, international spies, the whole shebang. So back in 2017, a new name got thrown into the mix, Elon Musk. And the argument was actually kind of solid. I mean, the guy obviously has a deep understanding of financial software, and he's known for publishing game-changing white papers. On paper, you could almost believe it. But surprise, surprise, Musk shot the whole idea down pretty quickly. And just like that, another dead end. So the hunt for Satoshi veered into even stranger, more shadowy territory.
This is where things start to sound like a spy movie. There's this whole school of thought that Bitcoin was created by an intelligence agency, like the NSA or the CIA, so they could fund secret operations without a paper trail. And in that story, Satoshi Nakamoto isn't one person. It's a codename for a whole team of government codebreakers.
Now, as fun as those theories are to think about, they really are just that, conspiracies. There's just not a lot of actual evidence to back any of it up. Makes for a great story, but it's probably not the true one.
So what have we learned? We've chased down successors, mathematicians, tech moguls, even spies. And we end up right back where we started. The identity of Satoshi Nakamoto is still, to this day, one of the best-kept secrets in the world.
And that really leaves us with one final fascinating question to chew on. What if the anonymity is the whole point? Maybe the real genius of Bitcoin is that it came from a ghost, an idea without a leader, a creation without an ego. So, does it even matter who Satoshi was, or is the mystery itself the most brilliant part of the design?
You know, for over a decade, one question has kind of loomed over the entire world of cryptocurrency. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin? But honestly, the more interesting question might be, how could they ever really prove it? Let's get into the ultimate identity puzzle. It really is the ultimate tech riddle, right? With so many claims and just endless speculation, how could the real Satoshi Nakamoto finally, definitively, prove who they are and just end the debate for good?
Well, the whole thing starts with this fundamental conflict, a sort of paradox that has kept this mystery going for all these years.
See, this whole mystery is basically stuck in this weird loop. On one side, you've got the pretenders. These are the people who come forward and say, yep, that's me. But they can't provide the one thing the community actually needs, cryptographic proof. And then, on the other side, you've got the deniers. These are the brilliant people the community thinks could be Satoshi, but they all consistently say, nope, not me. It's a complete stalemate.
So with all this back and forth, is there a simple, clean test that could just cut through all the noise and settle this once and for all? Well, believe it or not, the answer is a big, fat yes, and it's actually built right into the DNA of Bitcoin itself.
The solution isn't about stories or guesswork. Nope, it's about pure, cold, unbreakable digital proof that's all rooted in cryptography.
Okay, so to get this, you just need to understand one basic concept: cryptographic keys. Every Bitcoin address out there is public. Anyone can see it, but it's controlled by a secret private key. The easiest way to think about it is like this. Your public key is like your bank account number. You can give it to anyone, but your private key, that's your PIN. Only you have it, and only you can use it to prove you own the account.
So where would this proof even come from? It all starts right here with what's called the Genesis block, the very first block of transactions in Bitcoin's entire history. The address in this block is famously linked to Satoshi. It's totally public, everyone knows about it, and for years, people have even sent little bits of Bitcoin to it, kind of like a tribute.
And this all leads to a really simple four-step proof. First, you have the public address. Everyone knows it. Second, that address is locked down by a private key that only Satoshi should have. Third, Satoshi could use that key to cryptographically sign a message. It could be anything like "I am Satoshi," or even just today's newspaper headline. And finally, anybody on Earth could then use the public key to check that signature. It's a mathematically undeniable, rock-solid piece of digital proof.
Okay, so if the proof is really that straightforward, it just raises the biggest question of all, doesn't it? Why has no one ever done it? Why has Satoshi stayed completely silent?
To even begin to understand the silence, you have to look at what's actually at stake here. And it's not just about fame or getting credit. No, it's about something way, way bigger. Get this, it's estimated that Satoshi Nakamoto is sitting on roughly 1 million Bitcoins. Now, depending on the market, that's a fortune worth tens of billions of dollars. I mean, that's just an almost unimaginable amount of money.
And all of that, every single dollar's worth, is secured by the exact same thing that could prove their identity: a single private key. Using that key to sign a message doesn't just prove who you are, it proves you have the ability to move a massive fortune.
And that's why, as the source material points out, taking that step would have serious consequences. I mean, can you imagine? Revealing yourself as the owner of that much wealth would instantly make you the biggest target on the planet for governments, hackers, you name it. In a case like this, anonymity isn't just a preference, it's survival.
So what are the running theories out there? Well, some people think the keys are just gone, lost forever on an old hard drive somewhere. Others believe Satoshi was so incredibly careful and private that this silence is completely intentional. They never wanted the spotlight. And then there's another idea. Maybe the keys aren't lost, but they were passed on, given to an heir, or to some kind of foundation, just waiting for a purpose that might never actually arrive.
But all of this, it leads us to the final and maybe the most mind-bending twist in this whole story.
Just imagine for a second, tomorrow, a message appears, and it's signed with Satoshi's key. The entire crypto world checks it, and yep, the proof is undeniable. But would that really solve the mystery? And this right here gets to the absolute heart of the problem, summed up perfectly. It would only prove that someone currently owns that address, not that they are actually Satoshi. Think about it, right? A key can be stolen, it can be inherited, it could even just be found. It proves you possess something, but it doesn't prove you're the one who created it. It tells us who has the key today, but it tells us nothing about who had it back in 2009. The ultimate proof turns out to be a total paradox.
Which leaves us with one last really fascinating thought. What if Satoshi Nakamoto was never meant to be a person that could be found? What if it was just an idea, an alias, that could never be tied to a single real individual? Maybe this mystery wasn't designed to be solved at all.
So what happens when the creator of a world-changing technology just disappears? Today, we're jumping into one of the greatest mysteries of the digital age, the vanishing act of Satoshi Nakamoto.
I mean, really? How does that even happen? It sounds like the plot of a thriller, but nope, it's the true story of Bitcoin's founder. To understand how he vanished, we have to trace the final days of Satoshi. But before we can get into the disappearance, we need to know who we're even talking about. So let's start there. Who exactly was Satoshi? Well, here's the thing. Satoshi Nakamoto is a pseudonym. We don't know if it's one person or a whole group of people.
From the very beginning, their identity was a complete mystery. The only thing the world knew for sure was the name. And Satoshi wasn't just some name on a white paper either. After appearing in late 2008, he was intensely involved for 2 solid years, posting on forums, emailing developers, really guiding the entire project. He was the heart of Bitcoin, until all of a sudden, he wasn't. The trail starts to go cold with a single breadcrumb, or maybe the lack of one. It all begins with Satoshi's very last public message to the community that he built. You're going to want to remember this date, December 12th, 2010. This was it, the last time the public would ever hear from Satoshi on a forum. But what's so fascinating is what this final message wasn't. There was no grand farewell speech. It was just a totally routine, technical post about a software update. Completely business as usual. And that's what makes it so strange. There was nothing special about it at all. No thank you, no goodbye, just a standard update. And then, public silence. But, the story doesn't end with that public post. Satoshi was still active behind the scenes, which brings us to the most critical piece of evidence we have, his final private email. So for months after going publicly silent, he kept emailing other developers, kind of guiding the project from the shadows. He hadn't totally vanished, at least not yet. Okay, this is it, the final communication. On April 26, 2011, Satoshi sent an email to another key developer, a guy named Gavin Anderson. And what he said is incredibly telling. Just think about that for a second. In his final known words, Satoshi isn't talking about himself. He's worried about the project. He's concerned about how Bitcoin is being perceived, and he wants the credit to go to the whole community of developers, not just to him. Now, that last email, it wasn't actually the end of the conversation. Gavin replied, and his reply might have been the very thing that triggered the final vanishing act. So Gavin Andreessen writes back, and he's got some pretty high-profile news. He'd received an invitation that he clearly wanted to tell Satoshi about. Gavin tells Satoshi he had been invited to give a talk at, wait for it, CIA headquarters. And Satoshi's reply? Well, there wasn't one, just complete and total silence. And just like that, he was gone. He didn't say good luck, he didn't say don't go, he said nothing at all. He just left. And this brings us to the huge question we still can't answer. Was it the CIA invitation that spooked him? Did he feel the project was just getting too big, too visible? Or were there other reasons we don't even know about? We simply don't know, because Satoshi never explained it to anyone. And so the creator of this revolutionary technology just walked away. He handed over the keys to the community that he had built from the ground up and then vanished completely. In the end, Satoshi's disappearance actually became a core part of the Bitcoin legend. It pretty much forced the project to become truly decentralized. And it leaves us with one heck of a fascinating question. Does something truly belong to the world only after its creator has let it go? In the tech world, we love our creators, right? We know their faces, we hear their stories over and over. But what about the architect of a system that's now worth trillions? Well, that person is a complete ghost. All we have is a name, a handful of emails, a game-changing piece of code, and then just silence. So that's the mystery we're going to try to unravel today. I mean, it's a question that has kept developers, journalists, even governments scratching their heads for more than a decade now. Why would you build the future and then just walk away from it all? All right, so let's get on the same page about who or what we're even talking about here. Satoshi Nakamoto. It's just a pseudonym, a made-up name. It was attached to the original Bitcoin white paper, and this person, or maybe group of people, was active in the community for about 2 years, from 2009 to late 2010. And then, poof, gone. Our investigation into why starts right now. Okay, so let's open up our first case file. This one explores what's probably the most straightforward theory out there, that this whole vanishing act wasn't some accident or a crisis. Nope, it was the plan from the very beginning. Think about it this way. What if the disappearance wasn't a bug, but the final, most brilliant feature. See, for a truly decentralized system to actually work, it can't have a single leader. The second the creator steps away, that's the exact moment the creation proves it can finally stand on its own 2 feet.
So if you look at it this way, the exit was totally a deliberate strategy. Satoshi's goal wasn't just to launch Bitcoin and say, see ya. It was to make sure it was truly 100% decentralized. And you just can't have that if everyone is constantly looking to one person, one recognized leader for all the answers. By vanishing, Satoshi basically forced the community he'd built to step up and take ownership. And this quote really just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? From the very beginning, Satoshi was all about collaboration. They were constantly praising other developers, always hammering home that the project was open source. The whole point was to build something that didn't need a king, not even its own creator. All right, moving on to our next case file. This one digs into a more psychological motive. What if the reason for leaving wasn't some grand strategy, but a very human, very relatable fear of failure? Now, this is a really fascinating and, a very human possibility. Just try to imagine the pressure, the immense pressure of being the one and only authority on a system this complex. Every single eye is on you, just waiting for you to solve the next impossible problem. But what happens when you just don't have the answer? So, in a way, disappearing actually protects the project. Think about it. If Satoshi had stuck around and then completely failed to solve a huge issue, like scalability, then confidence in Bitcoin itself could have just collapsed. By leaving, the project's authority wasn't tied to one person's genius anymore, or, their potential to screw up. Okay, our third case file, and this is where things take a much darker turn. What if the disappearance wasn't a strategic choice at all, but was actually a matter of survival? I mean, Satoshi's security measures were basically flawless from day one. Always using a fake name, never, ever sharing any personal details. All of this points to someone who knew exactly what the legal dangers were. They knew creating an alternative, uncontrollable financial system was risky business. This wasn't some fun side project. This was pure self-preservation. And this right here might be the single most telling clue we have. So Gavin Andreessen, one of the lead developers, tells Satoshi he's going to present Bitcoin at CIA headquarters. And Satoshi's response? Nothing. Not a word. Just absolute silence from that moment forward. It really seems like the mere mention of official government interest was the trigger to go completely dark. Chilling. So for our final case file, we're going to shift gears. We're moving away from these grand conspiracies and looking at something much more personal. What if the creator of this revolutionary technology was simply running out of time? And this is where the timeline gets, pretty eerie. There's this guy, Hal Finney, a brilliant cryptographer, and he was the very first person, besides Satoshi himself, to ever run the Bitcoin software. He was also diagnosed with ALS. And when you look at the dates, Satoshi's gradual withdrawal from the project lines up almost perfectly with the period of Finney's declining health. If Hal Finney was Satoshi, his silence suddenly makes a whole lot of sense. He couldn't explain why he was leaving without blowing his cover. So, after looking at all these case files, where does that leave us? We've got a bunch of really compelling theories, but no definitive answer. And you know what? Maybe that's the whole point. So let's just recap. Which one was it? The selfless creator whose mission was finally accomplished? The stressed-out genius who was terrified of failure? The hunted fugitive on the run from the law? Or the dying pioneer making one last quiet exit? I mean, each theory paints a completely different picture of the person or people behind the code. But here's the thing. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter why they disappeared. The result is what's truly important. Because now Bitcoin has no CEO you can subpoena. There's no founder you can pressure. There's no single point of failure. Satoshi's anonymity, that became the ultimate guarantee of the system's resilience. It was the final and maybe the most important feature of all. And all of this leaves us with one last question to chew on. We live in a world that is obsessed with founders and their origin stories, right? But maybe, just maybe, the most powerful story is the one that doesn't have a hero at all, just a ghost in the machine, whose anonymity is the very thing that gives the creation its power. So what do you think is the greater legacy here?
Bitcoin itself, or the enduring mystery of its creator? You hear about Bitcoin all the time, right? It's this huge thing, part technology, part currency, part, well, revolution. But behind it all, there's a ghost, a total mystery. The creator? Satoshi Nakamoto. And today, we're going to dig into the big questions surrounding this ghost in the machine. So this is the big fear, isn't it? The one that keeps some people up at night. Could one person, the creator, actually destroy Bitcoin? It's a wild thought, and it really gets to the core of what Bitcoin is, and maybe more importantly, what it's become. So yeah, let's explore that. All right, first up, let's tackle the kill switch myth. The idea that Satoshi could just flip a switch and shut the whole thing down. Is that even possible? You know, the myth makes sense on the surface. Creator equals control, right? But the reality, it's way more complex, and honestly, a lot more interesting. See, Bitcoin was designed from the ground up to be beyond the control of any single person, and that includes its own inventor. It's just so decentralized that no one, not even Satoshi, can just pull the plug. Think of it this way. It's not like a company with a CEO you can fire. It's more like the internet itself. Where's the off switch for the internet? There isn't one. Same idea here. And check this out. This number is absolutely key. 80%. Since Satoshi just vanished, a huge community of developers from all over the world has changed 80% of the original code. Think about that. The Bitcoin that's running today, it's not even really Satoshi's original creation anymore. It's evolved. It's a completely different beast. So yeah, a shutdown is pretty much impossible. And it boils down to a few really important reasons. First, like we just said, the code is totally different now. Second, to make any change, you need this massive agreement, what they call consensus, from thousands and thousands of people all running the network independently. And third, and this is the kicker, even if someone did release a version with a kill switch, people could just not use it. They could just ignore the update. The power here, it's with the network, the users, not the founder. Okay, so if Satoshi can't technically kill Bitcoin, what about economically? This is the other big fear, right? What if the creator just decides to sell their massive stash of coins all at once and completely crash the market? And the number you always hear is 1 million. 1 million Bitcoins. That's what people estimate Satoshi is sitting on. I mean, that sounds absolutely colossal, doesn't it? Like enough to create a tidal wave and just wreck the market if it was all dumped at once. But let's actually put that number into perspective for a second. So here's the deal. That 1 million Bitcoin, it's about 5% of the total 21 million coins that will ever exist. Now, don't get me wrong, 5% is a big chunk, for sure. But is it the market-ending apocalypse that some people paint it as? Probably not. I mean, let's be real, the Bitcoin market is wild. It's no stranger to volatility. We see prices swing 10, sometimes even 15% in a single day. The community's kind of used to it by now. So a 5% drop from a single seller? Yeah, it would definitely make waves, but the end of the world? I don't think so. Plus, you've got this really unique psychology in the crypto world. Whenever there's a huge price dip, what happens? A ton of people get excited and start yelling buy the dip. They see it as a sale, a discount, and that creates this massive counterpressure that could actually absorb a big sell-off. Okay, so we've kind of established that Satoshi isn't some puppet master pulling the strings. They can't shut it down. They probably can't crash the market single-handedly. The system was literally designed to outgrow its creator. Which brings up an even more fascinating question, I think. Why does almost nobody seem to care who Satoshi is? I mean, people pour their money into Bitcoin, but they almost never stop to think about who actually made it. Well, it really seems to boil down to this collective shrug, a kind of indifference. And there are a few big reasons why. Reason number one, and this is a huge one, people just think it's too complicated. They've already made up their minds that they'll never, ever understand how Bitcoin works. And if you think the tech is way over your head, why would you even bother asking about who made it? You just don't. Then there's reason number two. A lot of people just think it's a scam. Maybe they heard it once from a friend or saw a headline. And look, if you think something's a total scam, you're not going to waste a single second learning about its founder, right? It's just an immediate, nope, not interested. Curiosity completely shut down. And the third reason is just how we are with technology in general. We just accept it. Seriously, think about it. Who invented the microwave in your kitchen? Or the radio in your car? For most of us, the answer is no idea.
We use this stuff every single day and never give a second thought to the genius who invented it. But here's the thing. Even if Satoshi isn't a threat, and even if most people don't care, maybe we should care. Because understanding the creator's vision is really about understanding why this technology even matters. What Satoshi pulled off wasn't just clever. It was nothing short of revolutionary. You see, for decades, the smartest people in computer science were stuck on this one huge problem, the double spending problem. How do you stop someone from basically just copying and pasting a digital coin and spending it over and over again? It was the one thing stopping anyone from creating real digital cash that worked like physical cash. And that's what Satoshi solved. But it wasn't just one thing. It was this whole package of brilliant ideas all working together. First, they solved that double spending problem. Boom. Then they got rid of the need for a middleman, like a bank. Gone. And on top of all that, they created a type of money that's inflation-proof. You can't just print more of it and devalue it. That's the core of the vision, right there. A system that's truly decentralized, that runs on its own rules. A system that uses math, cryptographic proof, instead of just trusting some company or government. And a system that's completely immune to inflation. This isn't just a small idea. It has the potential to totally change the world of finance as we know it. Now look, this quote is a really bold statement. More important than the internet. But it really helps you grasp the sheer scale of this achievement. This wasn't just another app or a new website. It was a fundamental rethinking of how money and trust can even work in the digital age. And to just ignore the person behind that kind of idea, well, you're kind of missing the whole point of the revolution, aren't you? So I'll just leave you with this final thought. Maybe Satoshi's identity isn't the real threat to Bitcoin. Maybe the real threat is us forgetting their vision. If we forget the core principles of why this was created in the first place, then what does this incredible creation risk becoming? Something to think about, for sure. You know, in the world of tech, there are some mysteries that are just legendary. And the identity of Bitcoin's creator, well, that's got to be at the top of the list. Today, we're diving deep into the enigma that is Satoshi Nakamoto, and we're exploring one of the biggest questions in crypto based directly on our source material. And that's really the question, isn't it? I mean, a multi-trillion-dollar industry was built on their idea. So could the creator ever actually step out of the shadows? Let's see what the thinking is. So for anyone who's not totally up to speed, Satoshi Nakamoto is the pseudonym used by the inventor of Bitcoin. Back in 2008, they published this incredible white paper, the blueprint for this whole new kind of digital money. And by 2011, after launching a technology that literally changed the world, they just vanished. Brilliant, completely anonymous, and then gone. What's so wild is that this wasn't some big traumatic exit. It was more like a quiet fade out. In one of their last known messages, they just said they would move on to other things. And yeah, that typo, thinks, that's the original. What were those other things? That question alone has fueled a decade of speculation. So why the permanent silence? Is it really just a choice? Well, our source material suggests it's way more complicated than that. In fact, there's this huge paradox at play. The very things that made Bitcoin so revolutionary might be the exact reasons a return is pretty much impossible. Just try to put yourself in Satoshi's shoes for a minute. You've been gone for over a decade. The world is a different place, and this little project of yours is now a massive global phenomenon. How would you even start to prove it was you? The first major hurdle is just that, proof. After all this time, how could anyone definitively prove they're the real Satoshi? The world would demand undeniable, cryptographic evidence, and that might just be impossible to come up with. Okay, so the ultimate proof, the one thing that would shut everyone up, would be moving some of the very first Bitcoins that Satoshi mined. You do that with their private keys. Think of it as the one secret password that controls all those early coins. But what if they can't? Our source points out a critical possibility. What if Satoshi lost those keys? If they did, they might never be able to provide that absolute proof. Without the keys, you're just another claimant with a really, really good story. And that brings us to the third barrier, which is just a huge wall of global skepticism. I mean, after so many false claims over the years, the entire crypto world is just primed for disbelief. The default setting for pretty much everyone would be, yeah, right, prove it. And we have to remember, this wasn't some kind of accident. Satoshi was a ghost by design. They were meticulously private right from the very beginning. No personal details, not ever. This intentional anonymity
the very thing that let Bitcoin grow without a central leader, is what makes a future reveal almost impossibly difficult. It kind of suggests the silence was always meant to be permanent. Okay, so if a return seems so unlikely, the mystery just gets deeper, and we move into the world of speculation. What actually happened to Satoshi? The theories really tend to fall into two main camps. So on one hand, you have the belief that Satoshi is alive and well, still out there, just under a new identity. But then, on the other hand, there's the more somber theory, that the silence is absolute, because, well, they're no longer with us. Let's just explore that alive theory for a second. Our source speculates that someone with this kind of unique genius, this mix of finance and cryptography, probably wouldn't just stop, right? So could they be working on crypto wallets, contributing to projects under a new name, maybe building the next big thing in financial tech, just hiding in plain sight?
But this is where the speculation starts to take a much darker turn. What if that anonymity isn't just a preference, but an absolute necessity for survival? What would actually happen if a powerful government agency managed to figure out who Satoshi really is?
Our source offers a perspective on this that is, frankly, chilling. The belief isn't that they'd get a quiet debriefing. Nope. The reaction would likely be severe and very, very public. It would be a punishment designed not just for Satoshi, but as a message to the entire world. And the logic there is cold, but it's brutally clear. You make an example out of the creator of a decentralized, uncontrollable currency. You send a powerful warning shot to any future innovators who might even think about challenging the established financial system. It's a sobering thought, and maybe the most powerful reason of all to stay a ghost. So where does all this leave us? Well, we're facing what seem like insurmountable barriers and some really compelling reasons for Satoshi to stay silent forever, whether that's by choice or by fate. You know, this quote from our source really gets to the human part of this whole tech mystery. Because beyond all the code and the markets and the controversy, there's a person, or maybe a group of people, at the heart of it all. And there's this genuine hope in the community to one day just be able to say thank you. And in the end, there's a kind of beautiful, almost poetic symmetry to it all. The creator of a system that has no central authority is themselves a figure with no official identity. Satoshi remains as decentralized and as unknowable as Bitcoin itself. And that brings us to our final question for you to think about. Just imagine for a second, they overcome all the barriers. They actually return. What happens the next day? What happens to the markets, to governments, to the whole idea of Bitcoin? Now that's something to ponder.
So who is Satoshi Nakamoto? I mean, it's got to be one of the biggest mysteries of the 21st century, right? The person or people who created Bitcoin gave the world this absolutely revolutionary technology and then just vanished. Poof, gone. But here's the thing. They left a trail, a whole bunch of digital breadcrumbs. So let's follow that trail together. This is your Satoshi Nakamoto starter pack.
And that really is the central question, isn't it? Is it one person, a group of brilliant developers? Are they still out there, watching all of this unfold? For more than a decade now, you've had journalists, amateur sleuths, and crypto fanatics trying to unmask the creator of what's now a multi-billion-dollar asset. But the identity is still a complete secret. The mystery itself has become a huge part of the Bitcoin legend.
Satoshi's last known public message was way back in 2011. But in those first few years that he was active, he wrote hundreds of posts, countless emails, and of course that groundbreaking Bitcoin white paper. This guide right here is your roadmap to all of it, a toolkit for your own investigation into this ghost in the machine. Okay, first things first, we need some context. And honestly, the best way to really get a feel for the story is to just watch it unfold. So let's kick off our starter pack with the essential documentaries that really set the stage for Bitcoin's dramatic arrival.
You know, Bitcoin didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was a direct response to a massive global event. In fact, if you dig into the original code, the Genesis block, there's actually a hidden message in there. It's a newspaper headline about bank bailouts. So to really get Satoshi, you first have to understand the 2008 financial crisis.
And that's why the first film on our list isn't even about Bitcoin. Inside Job from 2010 is this shocking, absolutely must-watch breakdown of the 2008 collapse. It gives you the why behind Satoshi's whole vision. A financial system with no big banks, no government bailouts, and no one person in control.
All right, so once you've got that crucial backstory, you can dive headfirst into the Bitcoin stuff. A great quick start is the Bitcoin phenomenon. Then, if you want the bigger picture, the end of money as we know it zooms way out to the history of currency. And after that, the rise and rise of Bitcoin and magic money show you this vibrant, sometimes chaotic ecosystem that just exploded around Satoshi's original idea. But look, if you only have time for one film, just one, you gotta make it Banking on Bitcoin from 2016. What makes this one so special? Well, it focuses more directly on the mystery of Satoshi than any of the others. It's really the perfect cinematic centerpiece for your whole investigation.
All right, so you've watched the movies, you've got the popcorn out of your teeth. Now it's time to go deeper with the essential reading list. To get to a level of detail that a documentary just can't give you, you've got to hit the books.
And your first stop, this is non-negotiable, has to be the Book of Satoshi. This isn't a story about him, it's literally a collection of his own words. Every known forum post, every personal email, it's all gathered right here. Instead of spending days or even weeks hunting for all this stuff online, you can just read this. It is the absolute closest you'll ever get to having a direct conversation with the creator. Next up, you've got a choice to make. And it really just depends on what part of this whole story fascinates you more. If you're drawn to the human drama, the wild stories of the misfits and millionaires who took Satoshi's idea and just ran with it, then you'll want to grab Digital Gold by New York Times journalist Nathaniel Popper. But if you're more interested in the big picture, the technology itself and how it could completely reshape finance, then your book is Bitcoin, The Future of Money by Dominic Frisby. Okay, you've seen the films, you've read the books, now for the final and maybe the most exciting part of this starter pack, going straight to the source. This is where you put on your detective hat and explore the actual digital archives where Satoshi lived and worked. This right here is ground zero. Back in 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto quietly created a profile on the P2P Foundation forum and announced his new creation to a tiny group of cryptographers. Talk about the quiet, unassuming start of a revolution. And the crazy part is, you can still go and read that very first post and all the replies to this day. But that very same account holds a pretty chilling message. Years after Satoshi vanished, his account got hacked. In 2014, someone posted this warning, claiming his personal information, his passwords, everything was being sold on the darknet. It's a really dramatic reminder of the high stakes involved here, and maybe a powerful clue as to why he might have wanted to disappear in the first place.
So where do you actually go to do your own digging? Well, here's your list. Bitcoin.org, that's the original domain Satoshi registered to host the white paper. Then there's BitcoinTalk.org, which is the forum he created to build the community. His last known post there was on December 13th, 2010. And for the ultimate treasure trove, the Nakamoto Institute has this incredible, searchable archive of everything he ever wrote.
And that's another cool thing about the Nakamoto Institute. It really shows you that Satoshi wasn't just working in a vacuum. It hosts the writings of the Cypherpunks, people like Wei Dai, Adam Back, and Hal Finney. These are the intellectual giants whose shoulders Satoshi stood on, the ones who are exploring ideas like digital cash decades before Bitcoin was even born. So, there you have it, the full starter pack, the films, the books, and the primary sources. After you've followed the trail and you've dug through all the archives, you're left with this one big, final question. In the end, does it even matter who Satoshi was? Or is the decentralized, anonymous technology he gave to the world the only thing that truly counts?